You're listening to Adapt or Die, the podcast that explores the science of transformation and the lessons that we can all learn from trailblazers and innovators who are working not only to change the way that businesses think about operating, but the fundamental underpinnings and technology that is enabling them to make faster and smarter decisions. Now, when we launched the show in November of 2019, it was very clear that the business world has changed, that the lifespan of a S&P 500 company had dropped tremendously in the past decade, and that those changes and that shrinking lifespan of a business were driven by external forces that were very hard to control or predict, and that required a different mindset, a different way of doing business to adapt and thrive in an environment that truly was driven by consumers, by hard-to-control forces, and by new competition that had emerged and was powered by technologies like the internet and the cloud. As of this recording, in March of 2020, the world has dramatically changed. And not only are the futures of the world's businesses at stake, many lives have been affected by the sudden and unpredictable and profound pandemic, COVID-19. And because of that, it's caused me to really rethink the way that this podcast is presented and even our branding a little bit. I think that it would be wrong for us to continue to simply carry on like nothing was happening. And so, as of this episode, I'm going to change the name of the podcast, and we're going to start calling it Adapt and Thrive. And while our mission remains the same, we do want to continue to pay special attention to the things that businesses and business leaders can do, not only to respond, but to adapt their operations and truly evolve to meet the need in an age of never normal. My name is Matt Gunn, and I appreciate everyone in the audience who has tuned in over the initial run of episodes. And today I am very excited to have had the recent opportunity to speak with someone who truly ran one of the largest and most challenging supply chains on the planet. In this episode, I had the pleasure of speaking with retired Lieutenant General Larry Wyche. Larry served as the second highest ranked logistician and supply chain professional in the U.S. Army. And from global transportation and distribution, manufacturing, maintenance, R&D, all the way to procurement, General Wyche has truly done it all. As the Deputy Commanding General of the United States Army Materiel Command, General Wyche presided over the day-to-day operations of a massive enterprise with a workforce of over 120,000 soldiers, and that spanned the entire globe. And truly, his mission was not only to serve his enterprise, but to uphold the safety and security of every person that his supply chain touched. That said, I'm pleased to present the first episode of Adapt and Thrive.
General Wyche, it's great to have you here.
It's great being here, Matt.
Excellent. So for our audience, introduce us to yourself and a little bit of perspective on your career in supply chain.
Well, Matt, I'm from a small town called Pleasant Shade, Virginia, and joining the military was a very honorable thing to do. What led me to my service in the Army was my uncle. He had returned from Vietnam, and we were all sitting around a wood-burning stove at my grandfather's home. And my grandfather asked him the question, "Son, now that you're home from the war, what are you going to do?" And my uncle looked at him and he said, "I volunteered to go back to Vietnam." And that shocked everyone in the room, including myself. And I was only 10 years old at the time, Matt. And my grandfather asked, "Well, why are you going back?" He said, "Well, my friends are there. My organization, the unit that I serve with is there." And he said, "My nation needs me." And then, Matt, he looked at me and he said, "If you ever want to get a start in life, join the military." And that stuck with me for years to come. And that's how my service started in the military.
That's amazing. And I mean, I think at the time in Vietnam, we all heard how difficult it was. So for your uncle to feel that commitment and to want to go back to support his team, to support his country, is truly amazing. And that it stuck with you is incredible as well. Now, you talk about sitting around a wood fire in Virginia, fairly humble beginnings, but by the time you retired, you were running perhaps what is the biggest and most complex supply chain on the planet. You came a long way. And just for perspective, some numbers here. As the Deputy Commanding General of the U.S. Army Materiel Command, you were running basically a $58 billion logistics enterprise with a workforce of 120,000 soldiers, billions in contractors, and with a presence not only in the 50 states, but 152 countries. With a supply chain that large and that complex, what was kind of your day to day, and how did you go from enlisting? What were the things that drew you to that world, where all of a sudden you're taking on some of the biggest challenges in one of the biggest supply chains on the planet?
Matt, I truly believe it just started with people investing in me. I was a young lieutenant back in 1982. I'm stationed at Fort Lee, Virginia, and I was a fuels petroleum officer. And prior to my wife and I deploying over, or in Army speak, PCSing, permanent change and duty station, to Korea. Well, my boss approached me, and he said, "Larry, being a fuels guy is great, but I truly believe the Army can use you if you broaden your perspective and you become a logistician, a supply chain professional." And so I went to Korea, and after company command and ended up in 1988, I transitioned over to being a career logistician and supply chain professional. And I haven't looked back ever since. And it was individuals like Stephen Bliss who took the time to explain to me. And frankly, they saw more potential in me than I saw in myself at the time. And over 30 years has passed, and I have to tell you, I have truly loved being a logistician and supply chain professional.
That's amazing. And so, yeah, in 30 years of service, like I said at the start of this podcast, we often talk about being in a fast changing business environment where it's highly unpredictable, often driven by outside events. And you really can't get comfortable with the status quo, constantly have to adapt to survive. Now, I feel like the Army perhaps is one of the top examples of this, where you're never operating under normal circumstances. What perspective do you have on that concept, on the idea to have this need to react and adapt quickly to sudden unexpected changes?
Matt, first, I must say that you're absolutely right. Never normal is basically the new norm, because we know for sure that little is for sure. And the world is unknown and it's unknowable. And so when you look at all of the crises that's happening around the globe, if you're not able to adapt and respond quickly and get results, you're not going to survive in today's world. And to me, the first step in being able to adapt is that you have to invest in your employees' professional development from two perspectives. One, their technical expertise, and then you must also train them and develop them to be good leaders. Okay. And I just think that's absolutely critical, that you make that investment in your people.
Yeah, from that perspective, and you've talked about this before, being a good leader is investing in your people. How important is it to you that you're training and building up the skill set in your global team that might surpass even yours?
It's absolutely critical. You can do that. And what's to me is so important is that you're so dispersed and you're global operations. So you have to train your team to be comfortable being uncomfortable. In light of the comments that you made with the changing environment, the never normal environment that we're operating in. So why do I say you have to train them to be comfortable being uncomfortable? Because they are going to be required to solve problems. Leaders solve problems. That's what we get paid to do. And if your folks aren't comfortable doing that in an ever-changing environment, you're not going to get the results that you're looking for. And so the question then is, how do you train them to be comfortable being uncomfortable? You teach them how to make decisions. That's how you approach it. They have to understand the logic in the process of making decisions. And if they go through this process and it becomes innate with them, they're going to be much more comfortable and confident when it's time to make a critical decision. And what I've learned in over the years is that in many cases, in frankly almost all cases that I dealt with, is that the process never changes to make decisions. The problem just gets bigger. Whether you are delivering a truck full of masks or ventilators, or you are employing the entire nation factories to produce these masks, you're still going to solve the problem using the same process.
Yeah, and to that point, the decisions, it seems, almost have to happen faster, and armed with the right kind of data and with the right types of people that are trained in the types of decisions that you make. How important is it also to have a view of the supply chain itself, to be able to see what's going on and understand the inner workings of what's, a very complex environment, to make those decisions, to support it, to know that if I'm going to move X product over to this new location, these are the consequences, but these could be the results.
It's a must. And when you're running a large supply chain, to be effective, one of the first things that you have to have is the ability to see yourself from end to end. Now, once you're able to do that, and you're understanding the key processes and the key things that's happening at each level, whether it's the tactical, the operation, or the strategic level, then you can look at, okay, what are those things that will cause my supply chain to culminate? And or what are those choke points or disruptors within the supply chain that will slow down or keep me from getting what I need to the end user? And so once you're able to see yourself, Matt, and you're able to understand the impact of one level having on another level within the supply chain, then you're able to address those shortcomings that you may have. So seeing yourself, then having the ability, or better yet, a better way to say it, see yourself, and then once you're able to see yourself, identify those choke points, and then what is the mitigating strategy you have in place to address those choke points? And so now you're responsive versus reactive.
And that's the position that you want to be in. I think it almost goes without saying, but often we don't think of our supply chains as necessarily saving lives. I bet you have a much different perspective on that. What is the importance for you to make sure that you do make the right decision, that you are getting things where they need to be at the right time and place?
It's absolutely critical. I mean, because the business that I was in, if we did not get something to a soldier, it could have easily meant life or death. It's just that simple. So, and the key to ensuring that you got what those soldiers needed, it goes back to my previous comment. You had to see yourself, then you had to understand those choke points, and then you had to have those mitigating strategies. And so let me just give you a case in point. So just put yourself in this position where you are in charge of all the logistics in the country of Afghanistan.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to get something from a factory here in the United States to a hilltop in the Korengal Valley in the northeastern mountains of Afghanistan. And if you don't get the ammunition they need and the food they need, soldiers could die. And so you're in the midst of flying or dispatching helicopters to deliver out on that hilltop, and all of a sudden the entire helicopter fleet is grounded for weather. So are you going to look and say, okay, well, we can't get this to our soldiers now? No, you better have a backup plan of how you're going to do it. Whether you dispatch a combat logistics patrol, or frankly, if you have to use a pack horse to deliver. And trust me, we did that. You're going to do that. And so I go back to my point. When you understand those disruptors or shortfall, what are your mitigating strategies to get stuff to where you need it? And that's some of the things we have to do.
Yeah, no, it's truly real-time impact analysis. It's understanding your product flow or the movement of goods. And then absolutely, if this mode isn't available, what are options A, B, and C, and how are we going to get it there when we need to? There is no option to fail anywhere in that equation. What are some other kind of examples or stories that you draw on where the ability to see your supply chain, trust your leaders, make snap decisions made all the difference?
I would say the one story that I will tell you in preparation for our deployment to Afghanistan, I forced all of the senior leaders to understand in great detail the commodity that they were responsible for managing. So if you were responsible for getting food to a location or ammunition or construction materials, you needed to understand the entire supply chain from end to end. So as a result, my deputy said, "Hey, sir, we need to have a certification program, and we ensured that every leader was certified." And see, it goes back to that the leader development I was telling you about, and they all had to get certified on their knowledge of understanding the supply chain for their commodity. And it was interesting. So for Wuhan, 6 months later, Matt, we had this location called Skinner Inn because we were mule skinners, and this is where the senior officers and NCOs went to eat popcorn and drank Coke to get away from some of the younger soldiers. And I had a command sergeant major Stephenman say, "Sir, I like to share this story with you because when you had us go through that certification, I thought you were nuts." And said, "Why is he having us do all of this?" And he said, "Sir, it was the best thing that we ever did. Because when you look around, when we get all these distinguished visitors, and you have a young sergeant or a young officer standing up articulating what they're providing on the battlefield and how they are managing the supplies to get from point A to point B, it is a great feeling. And so my point to you, and again, Matt, I'll sound like a broken record. It all starts with the training and the leader development of these folks that you're responsible for to get stuff from point A to point B.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. And translating it from the world of, say, military service, where these might be, a lower ranking person, I would imagine, and you have a specific rank in the corporate world, it might be someone like an analyst or a manager of a process, right? They might not be running an entire department, but they're running a function that really matters. And you can't take any of those folks for granted, I think is kind of what I'm hearing from you. You invest in their ability to do their job and help them learn their job. The rewards happen across the entire enterprise, is a way that I'm kind of thinking of that as it applies to, say, a corporation.
You're exactly right, Matt. And what you have to understand about being a supply chain professional is a team of teams. And the team is only strong as its weakest link. And you cannot take no one for granted within the team. Let me share this with you, Matt. I speak of this often when I'm giving speeches. Being a supply chain professional is like being a center on a football team. They touch the ball almost every play of the game, but yet and still they only get recognized in most cases when a penalty is called on them. But they're like the unsung heroes of the game, though.
They also have to be able to take a big beating too.
Absolutely.
So kind of going back to what we talked about at the beginning of this, all of us are in a world right now where things are not normal, where it's massively disruptive and challenging. All of a sudden, a lot of businesses are suddenly in the world of not only sustaining their own enterprises, but helping save human lives. From your experience, how would, say, the Army or what's your perspective on mobilizing a business or an organization from dealing with business as usual to suddenly dealing with a big, massive impact like we're seeing right now?
Well, the first thing I would say is hopefully that business have done their homework prior to something of this magnitude happening. And that would get after solving the problem probably a little quicker. Now, if they haven't did that, then what they are faced with is putting some process in place to allow them to see themselves very quickly. But while they are simultaneously doing that, the most important thing they have to do is to ensure that ensure the health and welfare of their employees. That's number one, because if you don't have your employees to do it, it's just not going to happen. And then I think you have to look at during a crisis like this, what product are you required to provide? And then just go back to those basics that I talked about, the ability to see yourself and then address those choke points. And then how do you ultimately get the goods and services you need to be there? And frankly speaking, Matt, the approaches that I've taken in the military, they're applicable to the civilian world. At the end of the day, they're basically no difference.
Yeah, I would imagine that there's a lot of things that translate from the military world to civilian, and truly there is no supply chain where things don't break or where some outside influences causes disruption. It seems to me that knowing your supply chain and knowing the state of it from one end to the next helps you identify those opportunities to just change, to be able to move as the need arises, so that you are ensuring continuity, that you're taking care of your business, that you're taking care of your customers. So I alluded to this a little bit as we kind of kicked off, but You recently published a book out there, Shirts Off Our Back, Boots Off Our Feet, How Leadership Enables Logistics and Supply Chain Execution and Gives You the Edge to Win. What can you tell our listeners about your book, or how to find it, and maybe what they might find reading it?
Yeah, well, the first thing I would say, Matt, is that, having worn a uniform for 42 years and being a supply chain professional logistician, 37 of those years, writing the book was my way of giving back to the dedicated men, women, contractors, and civilians that have served in the profession as a logistician. And I wanted to dedicate that book back to those Department of Defense and the individuals. And the reason the book is called Church Off Our Back, Boots Off Our Feet is because right on the eve before I was supposed to assume the leadership of 1,000-soldier battalion organization, I just went out on a hilltop and I had a chat with the man upstairs. And I said, give me the vision and the motto to lead this organization. And that's where I came up with Shirts Off Our Back, Boots Off Our Feet. And if you read the book, you'll see the entire mantra, and that is we're warfighter logisticians and supporters prepared to get the shirts off our back and boots off our feet to support the fight. We will never say no as long as we have 1 gallon of gas to give or 1 bullet to give. And it's all about selfless service, where if your son or your daughter or your niece or nephew was out there in the Congal Valley and you had to get him the food or her the ammunition they need to continue to carry that fight on, and if it required you to take the shirt off your back or boots off your feet, you would take it off and you would give it to them. And to me, that's what being a supply chain professional was all about. And so in the book, I just share several of the things that I've learned from being that supply chain professional over the years.
Excellent. Yeah. And I have read it, and it's not only got a lot of great perspective on running a supply chain, but truly on leadership and then building up your team through all of that. How is retired life treating you, General Weiss? What are you up to these days, and where can people learn more about what you're doing today?
I'm actually enjoying retirement life. I'm getting to do some things that I've always wanted to do, and that is leader development. I'm a certified executive leadership coach. I have a very good team. We go into organizations, and we talk to leaders within the organizations about leadership, about leader development, and focusing on, hey, what do your organization expect leaders to be? And then what do organizations expect leaders to do? Do you want leaders that have character, leaders that have presence, leaders that have intellect? And then what do you want leaders to do? And from my experience, you want leaders that lead. You want leaders that develop others. But at the end of the day, you want to develop leaders to get results. Let there be no doubt in your mind. This is all about getting results. And so I do that. And plus I work with a couple of organizations that I really think a lot of. And one of those organizations like Lamasoft, who I truly believe is on the cutting edge of providing some supply chain technology that can really add a lot of value to organizations achieving a competitive advantage, but for the right reasons.
General Weiss, is there anything else that you'd like to add to the conversation that we haven't touched on so far to this point?
Yeah, there is one additional thing I would like just to briefly chat about, and that being is, in my opinion, what does the supply chain represent to the Army? You will hear numerous quotes, over the years where one said that amateurs talk strategy and tactics, and professionals talk logistics. And there's a quote that General Patton says that if an officer doesn't know his communication supply, they're basically worthless. And the list goes on. But, I can recall back in 2008 when the former Secretary of the Army, he said it best. And he said that our logistician and supply chain professionals are unsung heroes. And during that time, we were preparing over 750,000 meals a day in support of Iraq, Kuwait, Afghanistan, as well as global operations. We were deploying and redeploying over 700,000 soldiers, DA civilians, and contractors a year. And he said, yet no one never asked how these individuals are moved. And he just went on to say that these supply chain professionals and logisticians are our unsung heroes. And it was to the point where they become their biggest enemy because they're invisible behind the scene, making things happen. And when you're looking at what's happening with the coronavirus right now, you have to think about those truck drivers. You have to think about those individuals that's stocking our shelves, the individuals that's running the forklift in the warehouse, as well as those ports, and definitely our medical care providers. They are unsung heroes. And I just want to personally thank each and every one of them for what they are doing for our country. And thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, General Larry Wyche, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for your perspective. And of course, thank you for your service to our country and to the career that you have dedicated to all of the men and women throughout the U.S. Army and have very specifically touched by running the supply chain. It was a pleasure to have you on the show.
Likewise, man. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the latest episode of Adapt or Die, or perhaps I should say the first episode of Adapt and Thrive. My name is Matt Gunn, and from all of us who make this podcast possible, to all of you who have tuned in over the course of our run, I hope that you are listening in good health and that you are doing well as all of us work to get through the pandemic COVID-19. For more information on the podcast or to find our archive, please visit lamasoft.com/podcast or visit Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast network. And please hit the subscribe button if you'd like to listen to more. Thank you for listening.